Broadcasting from the KMF Collective Studio, it's time for the Keep Moving Forward podcast. Join us every week as we dive into the stories of remarkable current and former athletes that have transitioned into the real world. Now here's your host, Katie Galley.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the 224th episode of the Keep Moving Forward podcast. I'm your host, Katie Galley. Today in the KMF Collective Studio, I have with me creator and host of the Behind the Mask-ulinity podcast and former professional baseball player, Christian Lopez. How are you doing, Christian?
I'm doing great. My eyes are still wide open right now because you said 224th episode, and I'm like, what? I only have like 40 on mine. That is awesome. That is so awesome. Good for you, Katie. Thank you for having me on. I'm really, really excited to be here.
Of course, Christian. Well, thank you so much for your kind words. But hey, guess what? Everybody has to start somewhere, right? So whether you're episode 40
Absolutely.
or episode 240, right? So that's awesome. So cool that you're a podcaster, fellow podcaster. I'm super excited to dive in, Christian. And so to just kind of get the ball rolling, to know your background a little bit. Can you tell us where you grew up and how, if at all, was your childhood shaped by athletics?
Oh, absolutely. So I grew up in Miami, Florida. My parents are both Cuban immigrants. Mm-hmm. They came to the States pretty early on. My mom was like 1. My dad was about like 12 years old. So they're pretty Americanized for the most part. I grew up in a pretty Americanized household, but obviously with the Cuban influence and the Cuban culture. I spent a lot of time around my grandparents, which were only Spanish speakers. So Spanish was actually the first language that I learned. And my parents both spoke English. So I was learning English here and there as well. But mostly around my grandparents, I only spoke Spanish. Grew up in Miami in that kind of Cuban culture, Cuban environment. And I started playing baseball when I was about like 5 or 6 years old. My dad's a huge baseball fan. My grandpa was a huge baseball fan. And pretty much if you're a Cuban male, odds are you're probably going to play baseball at some point in your life. You know, I know it's predominantly a thing just for any male. A lot of kids, a lot of boys out there play baseball, but a lot more so if you're Cuban. Baseball is just a very big sport in Cuba and within the Cuban population in the States. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of a given that I was going to play baseball. So my dad and my grandpa and just that culture kind of influenced me, kind of pushed me in that direction. But I don't, when I say pushed, I don't mean it in like, hey, I don't really want to do this, but you guys are making me do this, so I'm just going to do it to appease you. I was kind of, shown the ropes by my dad and said, hey, we're going to go sign you up for baseball. And I was 5 or 6. I was just like, whatever, I'm down to go do anything outside where I can play with, some of my friends. But I took to it really quickly. Even this is something I talked about in one of the podcast episodes that I've done, that one of my first practices in T-ball, I remember standing way out in the outfield because at that time, I hadn't really quite developed my hand-eye coordination yet. So that's kind of where they stick you to avoid any injuries. It's like, this kid doesn't really know how to catch and throw yet. So let's stick him way out there until he kind of figures it out. And then we can move him closer into the infield. So I was standing way out there, and one of my teammates whacks a line drive in my direction. And I was just like, I had it lined up perfectly. And I was just like, I was super confident. I was like, I got this, just like I've been practicing with Dad in the backyard. And then I put my glove up to where I thought the ball was going to land, and then whack, it nails me right in the face and knocks out my 2 front teeth.
Oh, man.
I immediately start bawling and start crying. My dad runs out to me. The parents are, looking in the outfield grass for my teeth. I don't know why. Like, why are you looking? They're done. Just let them be. Just leave them alone. They're done. I'm not getting those back. You can't glue them back in there.
Right.
But luckily they were my baby teeth, so no harm done.
Yeah.
But even after that, I was kind of scared a little bit afterwards. I wasn't really fully confident in my skills and my hand-eye coordination. But I love the game so much, and I love being out there with my teammates. This is the pure joy of baseball. Even with that incident, didn't turn me away from the game, or didn't allow me to not go back out there and keep competing and keep having fun. So baseball was a huge part of my life growing up for sure.
And so after that incident and, proving that was probably best, you were to be out in the outfield, away from things, hand-eye coordination. But did you end up staying in the outfield as a player? Over time, did you move around? What position did you ultimately end up kind of calling your own?
So it's funny because I started out in the outfield. furthest away from the play, probably the least likely to have an injury or have a bad bounce hit you in the face or anything like that. So I started out there, but I ended up as a catcher, which is the most,
wow,
in my opinion, no, not in my opinion. This is factual.
Yeah.
A catcher in baseball is the most demanding position, at least on your body. I mean, on your knees, on your legs. You take foul balls off the wrist, off the fingers, off the knees, off the toes. Like, you literally get beat up back there. So it's funny how I first started off in the outfield, taking a line drive off my face, and then I somehow find myself behind the plate, taking all the bumps and bruises that you can ever imagine. But I would not have traded that for anything. It is the most fun position on the field. You're always in the game. There's always something going on. Like, outfield is great. Like, now when I don't play softball anymore, or baseball anymore, I play softball on the weekends and stuff. And I love being in the outfield because even though I was a catcher and I loved catching in softball, at least, weekend kind of slow pitch, modified pitch softball, is a lot different than being a catcher in baseball, where you're blocking balls and you're calling the game and you're throwing runners out and all this stuff. So it's a lot more exciting. But my second favorite thing to do besides being a catcher was shagging fly balls during BP in the outfield. Like, you can ask any of my teammates that I played with. I don't know how I did it. Maybe I don't know, but I was a catcher, so it was really demanding and it was really tough on your body. But I was out there during batting practice, going full bore, sometimes climbing the fence to rob a home run for my teammate in batting practice. Sometimes diving for balls in the outfield. Was it the smartest thing that I could have done? Probably not. I probably should have, dialed it back a little bit. Luckily I never got seriously injured while shagging fly balls in BP or anything like that. But I just loved roaming center field and chasing down fly balls and kind of just sprinting. I don't know what it was about that I loved. And I loved doing that in softball as well on the weekends. But in baseball, catching was hands down my favorite thing to do. You're just always in the game. You develop this chemistry, this kind of teammate. Obviously you're all teammates, but you just develop this bond with your pitching staff that you don't really get to develop when you're an infielder or when you're an outfielder or when you're a designated hitter. You get to develop this bond and this chemistry. And when, you can ask any catcher, any pitcher out there, when you have that bond with your pitcher or with your catcher, and you can just go out there and kind of like read each other's minds. Hey, this is the pitch that I want to throw in this situation. This is what I want to do here. And you can go out and have that chemistry and the game just flows, and you go out and your pitcher throws 7, 8, 9 innings of shutout baseball. There's not many things better than that in sports, at least from an athlete's perspective, from a catcher's perspective.
Right. And so having, that camaraderie with your teammates, and then too, that clear passion that comes through, regardless of if you get injured or anything that comes up, you just clearly have that love for the sport. And so, Christian, as you started to really fall in love with the game, find yourself as a catcher and come into your own, did you, from a young age, see yourself trying to go on to college and then beyond to the major leagues? What kind of progression did you see yourself hoping to make in baseball?
Yeah, of course. I mean, just like any other kid who plays baseball from a young age and truly loves it. Yeah, I had dreams of, when I was growing up in Miami, I was a Marlins fan. Mm-hmm. And I remember Benito Santiago was a catcher for the Marlins back in, the late 90s or whatever it was, early, late 90s. And he was just a stud behind the plate. He was an absolute beast. He had a cannon for an arm. He would throw out guys from his knees. And I remember looking at Benito from a very young age, and I'm like, that's what I want to do. That's what I want to be like right there. I want to be in the big leagues. I want to play at, Marlins Stadium, and I want to be throwing out guys, and I want my family to be there in attendance. So yeah, of course, like any other kid, I had dreams and goals and aspirations of being a big leaguer. So, but you know what? I just loved the game so much. I knew I wanted to be a big leaguer, but I didn't really know how you go about getting there. I just went out there and I just played. I just played hard, and I had fun with my teammates, and I don't know, I just played 100%. And that's all I really cared about. It wasn't until I got later on in my high school career that I realized, like, oh, this is how it works. Like, you either get drafted out of high school, or you go to a big university and you get drafted after your junior, or you go to a JUCO or to a smaller school and you can get drafted after your freshman year or whatever. I didn't really know the ins and outs or the details of how you get drafted and how you go on to become a professional. I just knew I loved the game and I loved playing it and I worked hard, and that was it. And just knowing that, I kind of hoped, I was like, oh, if I just play really hard, or if I work really hard and I play well and I give it my best, then eventually I'll become a professional. But I really didn't know the ins and outs of it so much as I just want to be out here having fun and playing the game that I love.
That's amazing to have that perspective so young, to just truly be in love with the sport and wherever, of course, having those aspirations to continue on as far as you can go, but to just really be driven by that love for the sport. And so then, Christian, you just went into, which is great, a bunch of different avenues that a player can take in order to make it to the major leagues. So for you specifically in your own journey, which path did you take to get there?
So for me, I was drafted out of high school, and the decision wasn't really tough because, like I said, that was my dream. That's always what I wanted to do. When I was in high school, I was a good student. I had good grades. I had pretty good test scores. Actually, I only took the SAT once, and I got a pretty decent score. But after that, I was just like, why do I need to do this anymore? And then I'm not advocating other, young athletes to do this. That was just my decision. I was just like, look, I really want to play baseball. I got a pretty decent score on my exam. It's good enough to get me a scholarship to like a JUCO or to like a university that I want to go to. So I don't really feel a need to keep taking this test. I was just kind of at that point, like I said, I was a good student and I excelled in school and I had good grades and good test scores. But at that point I was just like, all right, that's, 12 years of school. I think that's enough for me. I just really want to play baseball.
Yeah.
But of course, like any mother out there, my mom really harped on an education. I remember her telling me when I was younger, she's like, oh, you're so smart. Like, I know you love baseball, but, what do you think about being a doctor? Like, you can go be a professional athlete and then be a doctor in the off season. And I was just like, yeah, Mom, that's a good idea. I could be a big leaguer. And then in the off season, 3, 4, 5 months that I have in the off season, I could just be a doctor and I could save people's lives. Yeah, I like that, Mom. Good idea. And then I found out how unrealistic that was. And then I found out how much schooling you need to become a doctor. And I was just like, yeah, no, Mom, I think I'm going to become a professional baseball player. Sorry, but even after I got drafted in the 6th round in 2003 out of high school, which is a pretty, anything I think in my opinion in the top 10 rounds it's pretty decent. It's pretty good spot to get drafted in. So I got offered a pretty decent signing bonus. I had letters of interest from some really good schools, like Stanford, Vanderbilt, Dartmouth, Columbia. Like I had, no official scholarship offers, but I had letters of interest like, hey, we noticed we like, you have good grades, you're a good student, you're a really good athlete. Like we have some interest, would you be interested in our school? But I never really pursued that route because again, my thing was like, I just want to play baseball. So if I was going to go to school, my option was that I was going to go to a junior college, to Broward Community College in Broward County, Florida. And when you go to a JUCO, you can go there for a year and then you can enter the draft so you can go on a year-by-year basis in JUCO. I'm not sure how exactly the rules work, but I know it's like you can go to JUCO for your freshman year and then you can enter the draft the next year. And if you don't like where you were drafted, you can go back for your sophomore year and kind of go on a year-to-year basis, where when you go to like a big D1 school like a Vanderbilt or a Stanford or something like that, you have to wait until your junior year, I believe. Once you complete your junior year, then you can enter the draft. I don't know why it is. I don't know how exactly it works. But just knowing that, I was just like, if I commit to one of these bigger schools, then I have to wait 3 years to get drafted. Anything can happen. I can get hurt. I can, my performance can decline. So I knew I had that full scholarship offer from Broward Community College if I wanted to go that route. I even remember going to school and taking a tour of the campus and kind of, speaking to some of the advisors or whatever there. But ultimately, my mom, even though she really harped an education on me, she told me, she's like, look, sweetie, I know this is something that you want to do. You've worked really hard for it. You deserve it. I want you to go get an education because you're a bright kid and I think you have a really good future whatever avenue of life you decide to take. But hey, this is something that you work hard for. I'm not going to push you in a direction you don't want to go. So if you want to sign this contract and you want to become a professional, I'm 100% behind you. And I can't thank her and my dad enough for that because, I think a lot of kids out there really get pressured, not just from their parents, from their coaches, from teachers, from whoever it is, pressured to maybe go to school when they don't want to go to school, or maybe pressured to become a professional when they don't really want to become a professional. So my best advice and my best wisdom that I can share with that is just do what's really in your heart. Like, yes, listen to your parents and listen to people that have been through that or that have some wisdom for you, that have some experience. But at the end of the day, you have to do what's best for you, because at the end of the day, you're the one that has to live with that decision. And there's times where I look back on that and I think about, what if maybe I would have gone to school and maybe matured a little bit, or maybe gotten better as a baseball player, and I could have gotten drafted in the third round or the second round and would have, had an even bigger signing bonus. I think about that from time to time, but I'm really happy with the decision that I made. It was my decision, and it was my path, and it made me the man that I am today, and it set me on the path that I'm on today. So I'm really glad with the decision that I made. But, just a lot of gratitude and a lot of thanks to my parents, to my agents, to just anybody that was instrumental in helping me make one of the best decisions of my life. And I'm okay, and I'm good with the decision that I made, because I got to play professional baseball for a decade, and it was the best decade of my life.
And that's amazing. And you're right. I mean, I think you touched on it. It's having that support system behind you, and whatever decision you make, just having those people they have your back and they're in your corner. But then too, having that perspective of, thinking back of what if I had decided to pursue an education at that time versus, trying to go pro. But too, and then on the flip side, I mean, there's no knowing what could have happened in those couple of years if you had decided to defer. So it's just, it's all about that perspective that you have. But exactly what you said, it's what you do with the time you've been given and the lessons you've been learned to help propel you forward and propel others forward. It's not just about, the what ifs. It's reflecting on, okay, I made this decision, so how is it going to help me be a better and more successful human being for myself and for others in the future?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I mean, I think about that from time to time, but I don't think about it from a regret standpoint. I just think about it like, how would my life have been different if I had gone down that route? And you're absolutely right. Like, just because I think, maybe I could have gone to school and gotten better and gotten drafted higher and gotten a bigger signing bonus, the total opposite could have happened. I could have gone to school and had a career-ending knee injury or something like that, and I would have never even gotten one day as a professional athlete. So I did what I did, and it was solely my decision, obviously with the guidance and the help of those that love me and support me around me. But at the end of the day, it was my decision, and I was happy in making that decision on my own.
Absolutely. And yeah, of course, being resolute in that and knowing that it was the right one for you. And so Christian, then pushing yourself forward. So deciding, having that decision at that time in your life, how did that kind of set you on the path then to ultimately become a pro baseball player? And like you said, lead you into that decade of your life?
It was, look, I was really excited. I can still remember the day when I got drafted. I got home from school and I turned on, back then in 2003, they weren't like broadcasting, the draft on TV or anything like that, but like they're kind of doing now in the first few rounds. So I went home and I turned on, our dial-up internet or whatever we had at the time. And I was just listening in on the broadcast of each team going through the draft and making their picks. And I remember I think like right around the fifth round, going into the sixth round, I first got a call from the Detroit Tigers, and I believe they had the first selection in the sixth round that year, or the second selection maybe. But I remember them calling me and be like, "Hey, we're going into the sixth round, or we're thinking about selecting you. Would you be open to signing or whatever?" And I was just like, "Yeah, definitely. Like, this is what I want to do." Like, no, I don't remember the conversation be very, very complex or very long. And then I think shortly after that, the Tampa Bay Rays called me and they told me the same thing. "Hey, we're coming up on the sixth round. We're thinking about taking you. Would you be open to signing?" And, I was like, "Yeah, definitely. What's the slotted money? What's the signing bonus at that round?" And they told me, I was like, "Yeah, definitely. If you guys take me in that round, you have my word. I will sign." And then, they came around, they drafted me or whatever. And, something I haven't talked about too much, which I don't hold it against them. Like, at the end of the day, as much as baseball is a sport, it's also a business, and everybody's trying to make the best decision for themselves. So, the Tampa Bay Rays told me, "Hey, this is what the slotted money for that round is. This is what you'd be signing for if you signed." So I was like, okay. So they ended up selecting me, and I was super ecstatic, super excited. And then my first phone call back with them after they got drafted, they're like, "Yeah, we're going to offer you this." And it was like lower than what they had told me. And I was like, well, hold on a second. You just told me you were going to offer me this, and now you're offering me that? Okay, I see where you're coming from. So no, I was like, I stonewalled it. I was like, "No, you guys told me this. I'm going to hold out for that."
Yeah.
And then at that time, I didn't have an agent, just because I guess I was a little cocky and immature, and I was just like, "I don't need an agent. I can do this on my own." But then when they came at me with that, I was just like, okay, maybe I need an agent. So I hired this agent, Kevin Kahn. He was awesome. Like, I have to say a little bit about him because he's great. My senior year is when I started kind of to get a little bit of attention in baseball and in the draft from scouts and stuff like that. And I remember Gavin he didn't even have a client yet. Like, he was a fresh, brand new agent, and he was just looking to obviously build his client base. And I remember him being there after games, like sometimes road games, sometimes home games. He was just always there. And he was like talking to me and talking to my family, like, hey man, I really like you. You're a good player. I'm an agent, yada, yada. And at first I was like, oh man, it feels really good to get this attention. But then it got to the point where it was like, all right, man, I see you at every game. You've talked to me so many times. Like, I get it. You want me to sign? But like, honestly, it got to the point where it was a little annoying. And I was just like, all right, stop pressuring me. I feel like you're pressuring me. Stop. Mm-hmm. But when it came time to choose an agent, like, I didn't even think twice. I was just like, man, this guy really wants to work with me, and he's really driven and he's really passionate. Yeah, he doesn't have any clients yet. He's new at this, but just his passion, his work ethic, the way he's driven, I was just like, this is the guy that I want to represent me. So, I called him and I was like, hey man, I need some help. Tampa Bay's lowballing, yada, yada. So he signed on, and then I ended up starting my career. And that was the first time I had been, because I missed out on that whole college experience. So I didn't have that kind of college experience on my own, living in a dorm by myself away from home. I didn't have that time to kind of mature and to grow and to learn new things and just to be out on my own. I had lived at home to that point, relying on my parents. Luckily, my mom taught us how to do laundry, kind of, do stuff to take care of ourselves from a very early age. So I was kind of learning some things and doing some things on my own from a very early age, which I have to give my mom a lot of praise for that as well. But still, I relied on my parents for pretty much everything, for money, for food, for shelter, for clothes, everything. And especially my mom. Like, my mom and I was her firstborn, and her and I have always had like this really tight bond. Ever since I was a kid, I was always really close to her. I like to consider myself a mama's boy, but my every time I say that, my wife is like, you're not a mama's boy, you're not. And I don't mean it mama's boy in the sense of like, hey, my mom did my laundry and she cooked my meals and she drove me everywhere and she did this and she did that. No, I mean mama's boy in the sense of like, her and I just always had a really tight bond. Like, she was the one that I would rely on for everything, and not just financially or monetarily or anything like that. I would rely on her for advice, for wisdom. Whenever I was going through something and I didn't, I was scared, I was worried, I was insecure, she's always the one that I would open up to. So we always had a really tight bond in that aspect. So this was going to be the first time I was going to be away from home. Like, obviously she was still a phone call away, but still it was going to be, it was going to be that distance in between, and for many, many, many months at a time. So it was definitely an adjustment process for me, but I was so excited to finally be a professional that I didn't even think about that. I'm like, I don't care. Send me to wherever you want to send me. I'm getting to play baseball. I'm getting, paid every 2 weeks as a job to play baseball, to put on the uniform, to throw a ball around, to hit a ball around. Like, yes, I don't care where you send me. And the first place that I got sent was this really little town in West Virginia. Princeton, West Virginia was my first stop as a professional athlete in the Rookie Ball Appalachian League. And just to give you a perspective of how small this town was, the entire population of that town was the population of my high school's population my senior year. That town had about 5,000 people in it, and my graduating year of high school had about 5,000 kids in our high school. So that gives you some perspective of how tiny and small that town was. So for me, for a kid coming from Miami, one of the biggest cities in the world, I was just like, whoa, this is definitely different. But it wasn't really a culture shock. I always kind of considered myself a chameleon. I can fit in wherever. I can make friends. I never really had an issue with that, but there was definitely an adjustment process as far as like being responsible for myself and being accountable and not having mom and dad right there to lean on if something goes wrong, if I get into trouble. Like, I had to learn how to take care of myself. So even though I missed those years of college and going to university and staying on a dorm that would have contributed to my growth, to my learning, to my maturing, even though I missed out on that, I definitely got that when I was in professional baseball. And plus I was surrounded by other teammates and coaches, some of who were much older than I was, who had been around professional baseball for years and years and years and had so much wisdom and so much experience and so much guidance. So I definitely got that maturing and that learning process from my days of professional baseball as well. But yeah, it was definitely it was definitely a learning process at first, but I can't say that I was scared or that I was fearful, because I was just so damn excited to be a professional baseball player that it didn't matter where I was, who I was staying with. All that mattered was I got to continue playing baseball after high school, and I got to get paid for it. That's all that mattered.
Yeah. And that's a huge goal and accomplishment that you'd set, like you said, from such a young age. And then to again, continuing to surround yourself with people who are on that mission in your corner. So the initial agent who was really just persistent in going after you. I mean, eventually you saw it was persistence, and you started to appreciate that, because it was that vigor and fervor that you had for that, the love of the game. And so, Christian, having this, leading you into this professional career and having this illustrious career, did you play for a bunch of different teams? Did you play for one team mostly? How did your ultimately your career pan out?
Yeah, so I didn't play. So I played in the Tampa Bay Rays organization from 2003 till 2009. In 2009, I was released. So I played with them for 6 years. But in the minor league system, there's 6 different levels for each team. So within that minor league system, I played for a few different teams, but always within their organization. And then when I got released there in 2009, the next season in 2010, I played in what's called independent league baseball, where it's still professional baseball. It's just not affiliated with a major league team like the Tampa Bay Rays or the New York Yankees. Like, you still get paid to play, but there's not really any levels to like be promoted or graduate to. There's no big leagues. There's just like this one league where you play. But honestly, that was the most fun I had playing baseball, because at that point, when you're in the independent leagues, it's either guys who are in the twilight of their careers and are still hanging on because they're like, you know what? I mean, I might not be good enough to like be in the big leagues anymore, but I still love playing this game. I can still do it for a few more years. And honestly, there's not anything else that I'd rather be doing but playing baseball. You get guys like that, and then you get guys like me who got released, who are trying to make it back to an affiliated team and make it back to get on track to be in the big leagues like every kid's dream is. But it's just mostly a league of people who just really, really love playing baseball. And I think that's what made it so fun. Not that affiliated ball and being in the minor leagues, people don't love playing it. Of course they love playing, of course. But there can be some politics. There can be some, like, hey, we just invested $1 million in this guy, and even though he's not playing well, we invested more money in him, so he's got to get more playing time than this guy that we gave $10,000 to, who's playing really well, but we didn't really invest a lot of money in him. That's just, like I said, at the end of the day, it's a business. In a business, you have to make business decisions like that, which kind of sucks for some guys. Some guys kind of get the short end of the stick that should deserve more, but that's just the way it is. We're in independent baseball. It's like, if you're playing well, you're going to play. If you're not playing well, you're not going to play, and that's the end of it. And it just made it a lot more fun. And those 3 years I had of independent league baseball were the funnest years I had playing baseball. So those were primarily the 2 leagues and teams that I played for. And then I also had one off season. One of the coolest things that I got to do as an athlete in 2010, after my first season in independent league baseball, I got approached by my manager, and he said, "Hey, would you be interested in going to play in a winter league in Colombia?" And I was just like, "Are you kidding me? Wow. Like, I don't have to go home in the off season and get a job or go on unemployment or do this or do that just to make ends meet and just make some money. You mean I can go to a different country and play baseball for a few months and get paid for it? Of course. Why are you even asking me this? You should demand this. You should demand this of me. Don't even put a question mark behind it." So that was one of the coolest things I ever got to do. I mean, I got to be in a brand new country, flight, travel, hotel, all that stuff paid for, and I got to, collect a paycheck every 2 weeks to do that. It was just one of the best experiences that I had through baseball, and something that I'll never forget.
That's amazing. I mean, I love how you speak with such reverence about this sport that you love. And then too, it doesn't just exist within the confines of the sport and what it gave you as an athlete. It gave you so much more, and that's what you focus on. And it seems like that's the trend in your story. It's, of course, the athleticism and the talent that you had to get to the level that you did. But it seems that the thing that you appreciate most is the experiences and the lessons that you learned from the time that you had as a baseball player. Because, I mean, that is amazing to have the chance to travel overseas overseas. It's not like you had to do it. You got to do it in order to continue on. And like you said, get a paycheck for doing the thing that you loved. I mean, you got paid to play baseball, the thing that was just on your heart your whole life.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, it's something that I didn't really value, and I took for granted while I was in it, which I think a lot of people do, not just with sports, just with anything. We take the little things for granted until those little things aren't around anymore. And then we're like, oh man, I had it so good. Like I had all these things right at my fingertips, but they were just so normal to me and just a part of my everyday life that I didn't really value. I didn't really stop to be grateful for the things that I had. And look, it took me a long time. It took me a long time after I retired. It took me a few years to finally realize, because after I retired, I had really deep shame and really deep feelings of like, hey, I didn't hit my goals. I'm a loser. I'm a failure. I'm not good enough. Like those were really, really deep feelings and emotions that were running through my body. And all I thought about was what I didn't do, what I didn't accomplish, what I didn't become, instead of looking at the things, hey, look at all the, like you said, the lessons that I learned and all the things that, how this made me a better person, a better man, a better teammate. And I think more importantly than the lessons and all the stuff that I went through are the relationships that I built. Like the relationships are so huge. Like so many friends that I met, so many coaches, so many fans and kids that I impacted. Like the relationships are probably by far my favorite thing that I got, because they shaped the man that I am today. And like I said, it's something that I took for granted. It's something that I didn't realize until after I had retired and after I was gone from the sport, that I was just like, man, I had a really good thing going. I built some really good bonds, and I built some really good relationships. And yeah, I've ever since I kind of realized that, I've wanted to continue that, even though I'm not in that arena anymore.
Right. And I mean, again, like you said, it's kind of in hindsight. It's, of course, loving it and experiencing it while you're in it. And, of course, it's hard to be reflective while you're in it. But then being able to have that perspective once you retired and left the sport behind. And so, Christian, after having that career, playing in the two different leagues, getting to play in another country, as your career started to come to a close, was it that you decided that you wanted to retire? Did injury bring an end to your career at that time? What kind of happened on the tail end of the conclusion of your baseball career?
Yeah, great question. No, I definitely did not want to retire. So in my mind, my expectations, my goals, my vision for my future was, I'm going to get drafted out of high school. I'm going to play a couple years in the minor leagues. I'm going to get to the big leagues at a relatively young age. I'm going to be an instant sensation. I'm going to win Rookie of the Year. I'm going to be an all-star at some point. I'm going to win a World Series. I'm going to get into the Hall of Fame. My family's going to be in attendance. Everybody's going to love me. I'm going to be rich. I'm going to be famous. I had all these visions that I had set for myself. And then on August 2nd, I'll never forget the day. It's just one of those days in your mind that's ingrained in your mind forever. August 2nd, 2009 was a day that I got released by the Tampa Bay Rays. And at that point, I hadn't really been producing well. But in my mind, in my egotistic, the best kind of mindset, I was just like, okay, fine, I'm not producing right now, but I'm still good. I'm still Christian Lopez, and I'm still the best catcher in this organization. Just that ego that would not look itself in the mirror, would not admit to itself like, hey, you need to work a little bit harder. This is, you need to put in some work. You need to make some decisions here. So on August 2nd, 2009, we had just gotten back from a road trip to Daytona playing against the Cubs. And we got to our stadium pretty late at night. It was like a Sunday. I think it was like a Sunday game, but the bus ride back was like, 4 hours or something like that. So we got back pretty late. And usually when you get back from a road trip like that, you grab your stuff, you put it in the locker room, and you just make your way home as early as you can, as quick as you can, just so you can get to bed, get some rest, because you got to be back at the stadium the very next day. So, I got there, I grabbed my stuff, put it in the locker. I was heading out the door, and before I could even get out the door, my manager not yells at me, but he calls me from across the room. He's like, hey, Lope, I need to talk to you. And I was just like, it's kind of weird. Like, it's like midnight or past midnight, or really just late in the night. And why would he want to have a conversation with me now? Why can't this wait till tomorrow? Yeah. Like, all right, kind of weird, but whatever, I'll go in there. So I went in there and I sat down, and as soon as I sat down, I knew something was wrong. I knew there was, I don't know what it was, but I just got a really, really bad feeling. And he just looks me in the eyes, And he just says the organization has decided to make a change and they're releasing you of your contract. And in that moment, I don't know how I did it, but I did with all the strength that I could muster. I held back the tears because the last thing that I wanted was to let this guy, and I didn't have anything personal against my manager at the time, but I was just like, this is a dude that just fired me. This is a dude that just told me, hey, you're not good enough. So see you later. Go home. I can't let this guy see me cry. Like, there's no way I can let this guy see me cry. So I did whatever I could where I was just like, okay, cool. Yeah, thanks. Appreciate it. Yeah, I don't. But after he told me that, the rest of that was a blur. So I went to my locker, gathered up all my stuff, still holding back the tears because I didn't want my teammates to know that anything was wrong. I let everybody go home, packed up my stuff, went out to the parking lot. As soon as I got out to the parking lot, I just bawled because for me, that was, I didn't know it at the time, but for me, that felt like a death, like a figurative death. Like, hey, this identity that you had for such a long time, a baseball player, this is not you anymore. Go find something else to do. You're not good enough to do this. That's what it pretty much was to me. That's how it felt in my body. So I just got outside and I bawled, and I was just like, I don't even know what I was thinking at the time. What am I going to do now? What's next? What's my next step? How do I keep playing? Like, I'm not done. This is not over. So I called my dad, crying on the phone with him. He's like, hey, it's all right. We're going to figure it out. We'll call Gavin, my agent. He'll figure out the next step. I called my agent, yada, yada. So then I was able to, the next year I went and I played independent league baseball. He got me a contract there and got me signed on the team there. But, after that release from the Tampa Bay Rays, like I said, that was kind of the beginning of the end. I just didn't know it at that time. So I went on to play 3 more years of independent league baseball. And independent league baseball, like I said, it's the most fun that I ever had, but it's definitely a step down from minor league baseball, from affiliated baseball. It's pretty much, if you're playing independent league baseball, not to be harsh or not to be blunt or rude, but it's kind of like you're not good enough to play minor league baseball. You're not good enough to play affiliated baseball or be on track to be a big leaguer, even though some of these guys in those leagues were ex-big leaguers and ex-guys who were like really, really good players. Just they might be at the dawn of their career or in the twilight of their career. So I went to go play there, and then I actually played pretty well there. I played pretty well. The competition was pretty good, so I was kind of holding my own and playing well. But in my last season in 2012, I started to kind of backtrack a little bit. I kind of started my performance started, at least my offensive. My defensive performance was always pretty solid. That's where I kind of hang my hat on. Like, that's where I was really good at. But where I kind of fumbled a little bit was on the offensive side. And that year in 2012, my offensive side was definitely struggling. And toward the latter part of the season, I got benched. And man, I mean, I had already taken an ego blow by getting released and by having to go play independent league baseball.
Right.
But my ego took an even bigger blow when I got benched in independent league baseball. So not only was I not good enough to play minor league baseball and affiliated baseball, I wasn't even good enough to be a starter in independent league baseball. So when that happened, oh my God, I was so angry, so bitter. I remember going in and having a conversation with my manager, who in retrospect was one of the best managers I had. He was a former teammate who became a manager. He's just one of the nicest, kindest, best dudes I've ever been around. But at that time, I was so blinded by my rage and by my anger and by my bitterness that I viewed him as an enemy. I viewed him as like, hey, it's this guy's fault that I'm not playing. He's the manager. He writes the lineup. He makes the decisions. He doesn't like me. He has something personal against me. And I don't know what it is, but we got to fix it. So I remember going into his office and just being really upset and yelling and saying, what the heck's going on? And, eventually I got to play a little bit more, but then, I was just pretty much a backup for the rest of that season. And that was pretty much the dagger in my heart. That was pretty much a dagger in my heart. And I remember I have never, ever, and I still get ashamed admitting this, but I have to admit it because it's the truth. It was the first and only time in my career that I was rooting for our team to lose just to spite our manager, because I felt like he had a personal vendetta against me. I felt like it was purely personal, and that's why he didn't want me to play when I couldn't admit to myself that the other catcher was swinging the bat a lot better than I was. It was that's just the way it was. He was performing better than I was. But I thought, I couldn't, my ego couldn't fess up to that. My ego couldn't say, hey, he's just playing better than you right now, because he couldn't admit that. So I took this personal vendetta against him, and we made the playoffs that year, and I was rooting for us to lose so badly. Like, not outwardly, but when something bad would happen to us, inside I was just like, yes, we're going to lose. And I get sick to my stomach just saying that, because, I know some of my, former teammates might hear this and might be like, damn, Lopi, I didn't know you were like that. But it's the truth. I was just so hurt and so bitter that I couldn't look at myself in the mirror and be like, hey, how can I get better? No, I just pointed fingers and blamed everybody else around me except myself. So when that season came to a close, I was just like, you know what? I'm done. This is it. This is my final year. I'm not playing anymore. And at that time I was 27. I'm 35 now, and I'm still in pretty good shape. I think I can still go back there and at least catch a few good innings. Maybe not a whole 9 innings, but I can still go back there and throw some guys out and call a good game. So at that age, I still had at least 3, 4, 5 more good years ahead of me, obviously health willing. So to retire at such a young age for me was not in the plans, was not in my goals, in my dreams. It wasn't what I had envisioned for myself. I had envisioned the last day that I play is the day where they literally have to drag me off the field, because they're like, hey, you just can't do this anymore. Your knees are giving out, your arms giving out. You're just not the same player you used to be. That was how I envisioned me going out, just riding off into the sunset on my terms. And I did go out on my terms, but not the ideal way that I had pictured it for myself. So I left the game. I was bitter. I was angry, and I just said, screw this. I'm done with it. I don't care. I don't care how much I love this game. I'm done with it. I'm done with the politics and with the favoritism, with the nepotism, with all the other BS that wasn't really going on. It was just in my head. I had made up these stories to justify why I wasn't playing, why I had gotten benched, because again, my ego couldn't confess that I just wasn't playing well. I was struggling, and somebody else was playing better than me. So that's kind of how I went out on bitter terms. And I can't say that I regret it, because if I hadn't gone out that way, I wouldn't be speaking to you right now. I wouldn't be on this other path that I'm on right now. So that the ending of that path set me on a new path. Mm-hmm. But the way that I went out, I could have definitely got out in a better way than I had. But I did what I did, and it is what it is.
Right. And I think, though, you hit on something so important, because at the end of your career, whether you have chosen to retire, you've chosen to hang up your athletic career or not, or it comes to an end abruptly without you really wanting it to come to a close, it's that you can go through that period of, okay, well, who am I without my sport? And so kind of seeing your career starting to crumble before you, starting to end before you wanted it to, and having that set in, of course, that brings out that bitterness and that resentment, because you are a baseball player. That's who you were your whole life. And so trying to figure out and navigate those next steps. But of course, like you said, Christian, this incredible path that led you to where you are today. Of course, when you're in the midst of it, you can't possibly see what's ahead, and that terrible, awful feeling is actually what's going to help propel you forward and ultimately bring you the success that you're seeking, and it, down the path that you were meant to walk. But for you, Christian, when you were in that pit of sadness and anger and frustration, how did you ultimately find yourself coming out of it and lead you and find yourself down this path, which led you to your podcast, Behind the Mask-ulinity?
Yeah, great question. I'll try to make this not as lengthy as possible, so we don't take up too much time. But
no, go for it.
But yeah, okay, all right. You asked for it. So when my career came to an end, obviously my ego was still riding high, and my ego still wanted me to feed it this validation. My ego still wanted to be rich, still wanted to be famous, still wanted to be told, hey, you're really good at what you do. You're awesome. You're this, you're that. You're a superstar. So, I had always been good at entertaining and being a goofball and making people laugh. And, I was tall and I was well built and I was in pretty good shape. So I just thought to myself, hey, what's a way that I can be rich and famous and be validated and be told that I'm awesome? Oh, I got it. I'll go become a Hollywood movie star. So I packed up my bags. I moved to LA, took all my stuff with me, didn't even think about it. It's funny. My wife and I were talking about it today on our car ride. And she's like, babe, that took a lot of courage. That took a lot of courage to just gather up all your stuff, leave your family behind, and just move out to a new city and not knowing anybody and just chase something totally different. And from the outside looking in, I can see how it looks courageous and it looks brave. But at that time, I was motivated, and I was driven so much by my bitterness and by my anger and by my need to prove other people wrong. Like, I had just visions of myself, being this hotshot movie star or TV star or whatever it was, and being on magazines and being in billboards and being able to point to people like, hey, you see that? That's me up there. What do you think about that? I was just in such a place of just this need for validation that I thought, becoming a movie star, becoming an actor would fulfill that need. So I moved out to LA, did this acting showcase, got a manager, got an agent, started taking acting classes, headshots, the whole 9 yards. And I did that for the first couple years that I moved out here. And look, it was fun in the beginning. It was something new. I was in a new city. I was meeting new people. And I just, like I said, I was really driven by this need to prove people wrong and to show people that even though I hadn't made it as an athlete, I was still going to make it at something else. So I was really driven by that. But when you're driven by something that's so shallow, that's not really deep, that's only going to sustain you for so long. And that's what happened to me after a couple of years. I just finally got to the point where I was just like, man, this isn't what I want to do. This isn't me. So one night I got home from acting class, and I was just there sitting in bed with my wife, and she could just tell something was off, And I don't think we weren't married at the time. We were just dating, but we've always had a really good, open, honest relationship. So we know we can read each other pretty well. So I got home, and she's just like, babe, what's up? Like, I can tell something's wrong. Like, are you not happy, or like, just something's off? Like, what's up? And I was like, no, babe, nothing's wrong. I didn't want to talk about it because that was such a deep wound for me that I needed to protect that wound and that pain at all costs. So She was just persistent, like, babe, what's wrong? Not in a naggy way, but she's like, what's up? I know something's wrong. Please just open up, talk to me. And at one point I just couldn't hold it back anymore. And it just started crying, and not even crying, just weeping, sobbing, bawling. And just, I don't even remember exactly what I said, but it was somewhere along the lines of like, I don't know. I feel so lost. I feel so scared. I don't know what I want. I don't know who I am. I don't want to do this acting thing anymore. That's not me. That's not what I want to do. It doesn't make me happy. Like, I don't know what makes me happy anymore. And, I was just crying and just letting it all out. And then, it felt good to open up and let that out. But again, shortly after that, I quit acting. And again, I was at a crossroads. I was like, man, who am I? What do I want to do? What do I care about? What do I have to offer the world? I don't even know who I am, let alone what I want to do or what I'm good at. So I was again stuck at a crossroads. And then I stumbled across firefighting. My sister is a police officer, has been for years, and her and I have always been very similar. She's always been a really good athlete, better athlete than I was. And I thought, if she's, really happy as a police officer, maybe I will be too. And I knew I didn't want to be a police officer. So that's what kind of drove me to firefighting. So I started reading into that, started talking to firefighters. I saw that it had so many the things about baseball that I missed: the camaraderie, the brotherhood, that kind of locker room teammate atmosphere, that chance to be a hero in the community. Obviously, the pay is good, the perks, the benefits, all that stuff is good, even though, of course, it comes with its inherent dangers. Yeah. But I was just like, man, this is something that I feel like would really make me happy and really make me fulfilled, and it would kind of fill that void that I missed from baseball. So I was like, okay, I made the decision. All right, that's it. I'm going to be a firefighter. That's my new identity. And I had already started to adopt to envelop that identity. I was just like, I'm Christian Lopez. I'm not Christian Lopez, the baseball player anymore. Now I'm Christian Lopez, the firefighter. So for 2.5 years, I was testing, interviewing, taking fire science classes, just doing everything I could to try to prepare me as best I could for that career. And then in 2019, March of 2019, I think it was, I got a letter from the Los Angeles City Fire Department, which is where I had applied, and I was super excited. My wife is the one that got the letter from the mail. She ran upstairs. I could hear her footsteps coming down the hall. She was like super excited. Babe, you got a letter. Open it. I was just like, all right. Calm down. So I thought it was going to be, okay, this is it. This is them telling me, hey, you're starting the Fire Academy on this date. Just make sure you're ready. And I was just like, all right, this is it. My new career, my new identity is beginning. So I opened up the letter and I started reading it, and it said, hey, Christian, thank you for your interest in the career as a firefighter for the city of Los Angeles, but we regret to inform you that you will not be selected to continue on in the process. And again, just heartbreak, ego crush, 2.5 years down the drain, wasted, that I'll never get back. But at that same moment, there was also kind of this relief, because even though this is something I had put a lot of dedication and time into, there was a slight little sliver part of me that was worried about all the stuff that I was going to see on the job, the trauma and everything that goes along with firefighting. And I know a lot of firefighters suffer from PTSD and just suffer from psychological issues just because of the stuff that they see on the job. And I've always been the type of person that when I see a nasty accident or something like that, I'm not the one that's like, breaking his neck to see what's going on. Like I'm that person that's kind of like, I don't know if I want to see that, because I might need to see something that's going to gross me out or something that I'm never going to forget for the rest of my life. And I just don't want to see it. So that was always a part of me that, even though I was gung-ho and full steam ahead with the firefighting career, there was also that part of me that was always like, dang, I know I'm going to see some crazy stuff.
Yeah.
Are you ready for that? I don't know. So when that rejection came, yes, it was an ego crush more than anything. But at the same time, there was that little sliver of relief of the universe kind of telling me like, hey, this isn't for you. Go do this. Go focus on that. And this and that being, at that point, I had already, again, another date that I'll never forget for the rest of my life, August 26, 2017. That was at, a point of just feeling really low, feeling lost, scared, insecure, all those bad feelings and emotions. And my buddy had reached out to me. He's like, hey man, I haven't seen you or talked to you in a while. Let's grab some lunch. And at that time, my wife was out of town for work. So I was like, hey man, yeah, my wife's out of town and I'm pretty free. Let's have lunch tomorrow. So I had softball that day, I think it was. And after my softball game, we met up. And this is a guy that I was roommates with for about like 8 months before my wife and I moved in, when we were still dating. But he is one of the kindest, gentlest, most caring, most loving, most affectionate, vulnerable, honest, real men that I've ever encountered in my life. So those 8 months that we spent together were huge. We had really deep conversations. We talked about things that two men usually don't really speak about, about heartbreak and about loss and about insecurity and about fear and about not feeling good enough and about not feeling worthy. So we had always had these really, really deep conversations. And again, on that day that we had lunch, it was another one of those deep conversations. He actually, when he called me, he was like, something just told me like to call you. Something just told me that like you need somebody right now and then you need to talk. And I was just like, you know what? I do. Let's have some lunch. So we met for probably 2 or 3 hours and crying, holding back tears as best I could, having deep conversations, walking around, the canal, having some lunch, having some coffee, just really going deep like we always did. And something inside me changed that day. Something told me like, you know what, man, aren't you tired of feeling sorry for yourself? Are you tired of waiting for something to just drop in your lap? Aren't you tired of waiting for somebody to just offer you something or give you a hand or get you up out of this hole? The only person that's going to get you up out of this hole is yourself. Like, make that change, make that effort. So after that talk, I made kind of a vow to myself, and I was just like, all right, that's it. I'm tired of feeling sorry for myself. I'm going to make some positive changes. So the very next day, I started meditating. I started journaling. I started doing yoga, doing more yoga. I just started doing things. I started devouring any self-help, self-improvement, self-development, self-growth book that I can get my hands or my ears on. And that night, after we had that talk, I went home, which kind of kicked off this whole deep dive into self-growth. Part of me is I went home that night and he told me, hey, there's this Tony Robbins Netflix documentary on Netflix. Go watch that. So I watched that. And again, my wife wasn't home and I found myself just bawling at some of these people sharing themselves and sharing their stories and being vulnerable and just thinking about all the stuff that I have inside and all the stuff that I've held back and all the stuff that has held me back from being the man that I really want to be. And I was just crying on the couch, just sobbing, crying. And when that was over, I was just like, no, I'm not done. I want more. I want more. And he gave me some other videos to look up. And then I just started going down this rabbit hole of, again, self-help, self-growth, self-development, whatever you want to call it. And that's pretty much what kickstarted my deep dive into this work. And I ended up coming across a life coaching course, and took me a few months to kind of take the leap into that because, again, I wasn't sure, am I good enough? Am I going to fail? Are people going to laugh? What are people going to think if I say that I'm a life coach or I'm a men's coach or this or that? So it took me a while to dive deep into that. But as soon as I dove into that, I applied, I took the course, I dove into that. And all that pretty much just kick-started the work that I'm doing now. So like I said, going back to that, that letter of rejection from the fire department, even though it was an ego crusher, it was a sign from the universe telling me, hey, don't focus on that. Focus on this, which being the coaching, the podcast, and everything else. And the podcast kind of came about a little while afterwards, after I had kind of started doing this work, after I had kind of been going deeper and deeper into men's groups and opening up and sharing blog posts about my feelings and my emotions. And, because there's so much stuff out there about men sharing their successes and their wins and all the stuff that they had to overcome and all this and all that, which is great. I love all that stuff as well. But there's not a lot of men out there also talking about the fears and the struggles and the insecurities and the shame and all that other stuff that comes along with it. Because all these men that we idolize, that we look up to, have all gone through that stuff. It's just that on social media and on the internet, all you see is kind of the wins and the victories and the accolades and the achievements, but not a lot of them talk about, hey, I went through insecurity. I went through loneliness. I went through fear. I went through shame. I went through doubt. I went through all these things. So the podcast kind of came about because I was at a point where I was like, man, I really enjoy this stuff. I really enjoyed talking about this stuff. There's not a lot of men out there talking about this stuff. And this is not only something that other men can relate to or something that other men can get a benefit from, but this is something that I need. This is something that I deeply need, because this work, even though it has impacted other men and other men have reached out to me to say, hey, thanks for this episode on the podcast, or thanks for this, or thanks for that. This work, I mean, I know it's kind of sounds selfish, but this work is for me. Mm-hmm. Like, this work is for me. Like, I really needed this work. I really didn't know who the hell I was. And when I started to do this work and really start to tear away those layers of that onion and find out who I really am without baseball, without firefighting, without acting, without this label or that label, and find out who I really am, what I care about, what I'm willing to stand up for and fight for, what my values are, what my principles are. Man, this work has been so exciting, because I'm finding out like a brand new person, like I always knew that person was down there, but it's just like, hey, it's nice of you to show up to the world as you really are. So with the podcast, that was another thing where I kind of had the idea for it, but it took me about a year to actually implement it, because again, I was still battling those fears and those doubts and those insecurities. What if this fails? What if nobody listens? What if people laugh at me? What if people think it's stupid? What if I say the wrong thing? What if, all these what ifs, instead of saying, what if it blows up? Mm-hmm. What if people really get a lot of impact and benefit from it? What if this is what you're meant to do? I wasn't thinking those what ifs. I was thinking all the negative what ifs. So it took me about a year from the time of like, hey, I should do a podcast, to actually implementing it because of those fears and those hesitations, until one day I just sat down at my computer. I was like, all right, no more of this. No more excuses. No more hiding from your fears. No more being comfortable. Google, how do you start a podcast? Mm. And I just went from there. And I had GarageBand. I had a good microphone, thanks to my wife. I had everything that I needed. I just needed to take action, and I needed to muster up that courage to do so. And once I did so, man, it's been great. It's been great. Like you said, you're 240 episodes in. I'm only 40 episodes in, so I can't even imagine what's to come for me. But 40 something episodes in, man, this has been awesome. It has been so awesome for me, and I just like we're having right now. I love these deep conversations and these deep connections, because this conversation that we're having right now, yes, it's beneficial for me to open up about this stuff and get this stuff out there. It's beneficial for you, for your audience, for what you're doing. Mm-hmm. But there's somebody listening out there to this right now that is going to get something out of this. And just knowing that's what keeps pushing me forward. That's what keeps me inspired. That's what keeps me motivated. And on those days where I don't think I could keep going, on those days where those fears and those insecurities get the best of me, I always try to remind myself, hey, there's somebody listening to this right now who's going to get something out of this. So keep that one person in mind.
Absolutely. I love that. You touched on two of probably, I have a lot of favorite phrases. Keep moving forward is among them, obviously, but two of my favorite themed things are, one, you never know who's listening. And that's so true. When you feel kind of dejected, or maybe, why am I doing this? You remember that one person who is you. You are the reason you started this podcast, because you want to help someone like you. And you are. Yeah. You just keep putting that content out there. You keep talking. When you're talking into your microphone, you are talking to yourself. You're talking to the you back when your baseball career ended. You were talking to the you who needed this platform, who needed to hear your story now. And so that's such an incredible thing. And then two, I mean, you never know who's listening. And then it's the thought of, well, what if you said yes? What if you tried? What if you just did it? You know, rather than thinking of the negatives that could come, what if it was good? What if it had even a little bit of success? What if it never had any more than 5 listeners or 5 subscribers? But what if it really helped you? You know, there's just a bunch of different positive ways to look at it. So I love that, because you're right. It's those two things coming together and then putting it out there in the form of your podcast.
So well said. And it just reminded me of another quote that's really famous. I'm not sure how it is verbatim, but essentially it says, people aren't afraid of failing. They're afraid of being wildly successful. And, I would hear that phrase sometimes and I would just be like, that's BS. Like, who the heck is going to be afraid of being successful, afraid of achieving their dreams? But I'm starting to realize, like, that's true. And it rings true to me, because the more, quote unquote, and success is different for everybody. But for me, success means growing this community, impacting more people. But for me, being scared of that success is being scared of, man, if I grow and I blow up and I start impacting more people, then more people are going to know who I am. And there's going to be more responsibility. There's going to be more weight on my shoulder. There's going to be more expectation for me to, like, have all the answers and say the right things and do all the right things. And of course, the more you grow, the more haters and the more trolls and the more this stuff is going to come. So I used to not believe, I used to think that saying and that phrase was BS, but I can see it now, because yes, I would love, for this community to just grow and grow and grow, and this podcast to grow and grow and grow. But when it grows and grows and grows, there's more work to be done. There's more decisions to be made. There's probably people to hire. There's speaking engagements to book, and there's promotion, and there's marketing, and there's sales, and there's all this stuff that, just thinking about it and just saying it kind of fills me with a little bit of anxiety. So I can see now how that saying rings true to a lot of people, because when you grow, the more you grow, the more responsibility comes at you.
Absolutely. And two, I mean, I love that too. It's, you have to start somewhere, and then it's kind of that catch-22 of, you're afraid to start, but then you start doing it and you're like, oh man, what if it is what it becomes what I want it to be? What if it is successful? And so, but it's just, keep plugging along, keep doing what you're doing. And so with that in mind, Christian, I mean, you said you're in 40 something episodes in, and you're intending to keep growing your podcast and going in with this platform. So what do you hope to grow behind the Mask-ulinity too? What do you hope it becomes? Where do you see the future of this platform going?
Great question. I just talked about this earlier with somebody on the phone conversation, and this was actually a similar question to, so I recently became a part of this community called Everyman. So for any man listening to this, go check them out. Like, it's just a community much bigger than my, small little community, but a community of men from literally all over the world, whose main purpose is just to come together and open up and speak about the things that men aren't usually taught to speak about, emotions and feelings, and getting in touch with their bodies, instead of just being the logical problem solvers that we've always been, just to get more in touch with our feelings, with our emotions, with ourselves. So if you guys have a chance to check that out, Everyman is really, really a good community. But a question that was posed in that community recently was, where do you envision yourself, your practice, your business, or whatever it is, 3 or 5 years from now? So I looked at this and I was just like, man, this is a good question. I'm going to answer this and really, really drop a good vision for myself. So for me, I would love for this podcast to turn into one of the more popular listened to podcasts in the world, not just for popularity's sake, not just for numbers' sake, but for impact's sake, for the sake of so many men out there who need a podcast like the one that I'm offering, who need a space to open up. They want to open up. They need to open up, but they don't have anybody in their lives that they feel safe, that they feel comfortable, that they trust opening up to about these things. So get it to a place where it grows and people from all over the world are listening. And with that, I can use that as a promotional marketing tool to promote my coaching services and working with me one-on-one. And eventually I'd like to just turn this into a practice, into a business that does retreats, that does seminars, that does workshops, that does one-on-one coaching, that does speaking engagements, that just does, I would love, one of my kind of silly fantasy dreams is obviously not now with the pandemic, but I would love to just hold hugging seminars where people can just show up and I just give them hugs because I love hugging. That's been one of the toughest things about this whole social distancing is like not being able to hug my loved ones. It's just like, it's so hard for me. So one of my fantasy dreams is like, just have conventions where I travel the world and we all get together and just give each other hugs and just feel the love. It's one of my fantasy dream goals, but on a more realistic place. Yeah, I'd love to build it into something where we do retreats, we do workshops, we just do stuff to just help men become better men, because not talking about these things has held me back from so much. It brought me so much shame and so much guilt and so much fear and so much insecurity. It made me feel like I wasn't man enough, like I wasn't good enough. And my main goal, my main aim with this work, with the podcast, with this community is just get men to a point where they feel good enough exactly as they are. They don't have to prove anything. They don't have to make a certain amount of money. They don't have to have a big fancy house or a fancy sports car or a trophy wife or nothing. Just show up to the world just as you are, because I believe strongly that if you go about your business, if you show up to the world exactly as you are and you own and you accept your flaws, your fears, your failures, your imperfections, all of that stuff, if you truly embody that and you truly live that, you will find the career, you will find the person, you will find the community, you will find everything that is meant for you to find if you just really come from that place of truth, of honesty, of vulnerability. Just show up to the world and be like, hey, world, this is me. Because to me, and you might agree with this, to me, the most compelling people for me are the people that you just come across and you don't know what it is. You can't quite put your finger on it, but you just look at them and you're like, man, that person is so comfortable and they own who they are. They own who they are. They might not have the similar opinion to somebody else or this or that, or they have all these differences, but they know exactly who they are and they show up to the world and to their work every single day exactly as they are without being apologetic about it. That's, to me, that's the most compelling people in the world to me.
I love this, Christian. I mean, it's clearly such a needed platform, and it's incredible that you're one, not viewing other platforms out there, other people doing this as competition. It's you come together and you're building those relationships and you're saying, okay, we're tackling this and we're helping people together. And so that's amazing that you're joining forces, to get after it. And of course, it's coming from your own experiences. So being able to draw on those, know where you came from and how hard it is to constantly struggle with that self-worth, and every time you come up against it, and sometimes still being surprised and you think, no, I'm prepared for it this time, but it's still there, that struggle with self-worth. So being able to help those young men themselves in tackling that, and like you said, feel good enough showing up exactly as they are.
Yeah, that's what's been huge for me. And if that's the only thing that somebody gets out of my podcast or my community or this podcast right here, if you get anything out of this, it's just have that knowing and that courage to just show up exactly who you are, because that's good enough. There's never going to be anybody else like you in the history of the universe. So bring that. People want to see that. People want to see that uniqueness and that you in the world. So don't be afraid to show it.
Yep. Absolutely. And so, Christian, I mean, looking back on this, this reflective journey, this incredible path that has led you to where you are today, with Behind the Mask-ulinity, and being able to help young men and just all men of all ages with this platform that you have, and knowing these high aspirations that, of course, you're going to achieve and keep impacting people and empowering them with what you've created. I just have one final question that I ask all of my interviewees. What do you want to be remembered for?
Being real, being authentic, being vulnerable. I love Brene Brown, and I love how she talks about vulnerability. If when I'm dead and gone and people can remember me as like, man, Christian was such a real, authentic, vulnerable man. I think if I show up like that every single day, my life will turn out exactly how it's meant to turn out.
Thank you all for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. To learn more about our guest, check out the show notes at keepmovingforward.us. While you're there, go ahead and subscribe to our newsletter to stay up to date on all things coming out of the KMF Collective Studio. Always remember, You can beat the odds and go the distance if only you keep moving forward.